Hello, good evening, welcome. My name is Laura Brower-Haygood, and I am the Executive Director of the DC History Center. And we are so pleased tonight to present tonight's program, Imagining Statehood, DC Statehood Activism Through the Years, with Mr. Samuel Jordan, Ms. Anise Jenkins, and Mr. Ty Hobson-Powell, and moderator, Mr. Cosby Hunt. The program is part of our ongoing Context for Today series of conversations that take a historical look at the roots of today's most urgent and pressing social issues. So thanks for coming this evening. For those of you who are not familiar with us already, and we hope there are many of you, the DC History Center is a nonprofit, community-supported educational and research organization, and we were founded in 1894. Our mission is to deepen understanding of our city's past, to connect, empower, and inspire. We do this work through research and scholarship, youth education, adult programs like this one, and exhibits. We're also located in the historic Carnegie Library at Mount Vernon Square in downtown, and our exhibits are now open to the public Friday and Saturday afternoons once more. You'll find us online at dchistory.org and on social, so please check us out there. Tonight, we are putting a spotlight on community activism and the call for statehood. Our speakers will offer their unique perspectives on what it means to be an activist in the long and patient fight for DC statehood and how that's changed over the years. But we will also look to the future and imagine together what statehood would look like for all Washingtonians. I have no doubt that you will find their steadfast commitment to this cause an inspiration for your own civic engagement. As we begin this evening's program, I want to pause and remember Charles Cassell, who passed away on May 17th. Cassell was a longtime advocate in the statehood movement and a friend of the DC History Center, and we continue this fight in his memory. And while we uplift and honor our elders, we also take a moment to recognize that we stand on the ancestral lands of the Nacotchunk or Anacostan people and the Piscataway people. We acknowledge over a dozen tribal nations living across the region, along the Anacostia and Potomac watersheds, the Chesapeake Bay area, and on the land today considered part of Virginia and Maryland. We pay our respects to these communities and to their elders as well. You are warmly invited to join us next week on June 23rd at 7:30 for our book talk on Facing Georgetown's History, a reader on slavery, memory, and reconciliation. Contributors Adam Rothman, Elsa Mendoza, and Laurette Savoy will be in discussion with Washington history editor Belle Julian Clement, and they will cover their work to collect, contextualize, and reckon with the history of slavery in Georgetown. When registering, you can purchase the book and make a donation if you so wish. So we are very lucky tonight to be joined by Eugene D. Kinlow, Director in the Office of Federal and Regional Affairs in the Executive Office of Mayor Muriel Bowser. I also want to thank him and the Office of the Secretary of the District of Columbia, and particularly Secretary Kimberly Bassett for their wonderful support of this program. Eugene, I'll hand the mic over to you for a minute.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to start off by thanking the DC History Center for bringing us this most timely conversation. I'd like to thank you, Laura Brower-Haygood, for your invitation and the intentional way that the DC History Center keeps the issue of DC statehood with us and before us and not just behind us. As a member of the DC History Center's Community Council, I welcome those of you at home and our panelists for your time today. Laura will remind you that this segment is being taped for posterity and available for review for future historians. As a native Washingtonian, the issue of disenfranchisement has been with me for the entirety of my life. But over the last few years, I've sensed a shift in local and national perspectives on DC statehood. This shift can be seen in all aspects of DC, from our murals, from our music, in our residence, and here also at the DC History Center. DC Mayor Bowser said, "I was born without representation, but I will not die without representation." Tonight, you'll hear from people who are close to the ground on DC statehood and dissected the validity of the mayor's statement. You at home will decide whether we are getting closer to statehood or moving farther away from it. You'll get to decide whether you want to be all in or a bystander. But sit tight, because tonight you're going to hear from Anise, Sam, Ty, and Cosby. And enjoy this program. I think it's a wonderful prelude to Juneteenth. So enjoy and be well. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you also for mentioning our community council, our brand new community council, which met for the first time this past week. So now I'd like to invite our speakers to join me on screen. Samuel Jordan is the executive director of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, which he founded in 2016. He has conducted community livability, issue organizing, and skills training programs in Baltimore and Washington, D.C. over the past 12 years. A protege of DC Statehood Party founders Julius Hobson and Josephine Butler, Mr. Jordan is a past president of the DC Statehood Party. Anise Jenkins joined the Stand Up for DC in DC, known as Free DC, upon its founding in 1997 and has served as its executive director and president since 2008. A native Washingtonian, Jenkins is a graduate of the Howard University Department of Political Science and also earned a master's degree in business at Howard. She is widely recognized for her activism around human rights and democracy in DC. Ty Hobson-Powell is the co-founder and director of policy for Concerned Citizens DC. He is a lead organizer with 51 for 51, serving as an outreach strategist, and issue advocate in their campaign for DC statehood. He is also a native Washingtonian and a lifelong community advocate. Our moderator for this program is Cosby Hunt, a social studies teacher at Thurgood Marshall Academy. He is also the manager of youth programs for the Center for Inspired Teaching, where he co-founded the Building Literacy and the Social Studies program. He's helped create Common Core aligned curricula at the middle and high school levels for District of Columbia Public Schools. He also created DC's first citywide credit-bearing high school history course, Real World History, which the DC History Center was actually proud to participate in this past year. Cosby was named the 2008 History Teacher of the Year for the District of Columbia and the 2019 Hannah E. McGregor Teacher of the Year for National History Day. And again, a big thank you to Eugene Kinlow. As always, we will leave a good amount of time for audience questions, so please send your questions as they occur to you using the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. Let the questions flow. We love them, and we do try to get to as many as possible of them. Anise, Samuel, Ty, and Cosby, thank you for joining us this evening, and the mics are all yours.
Thank you so much, Laura. This is a real honor to be with everyone here. And I just want to give a shout out to Brother Kinlow's flag. I don't know if people saw that American flag behind him had 51 stars on it. And so I need to get myself that flag. And I promised him that I would get him this shirt. So some of you who know me, I'm a pretty informal guy, but I usually do dress up for panels, but this is dressing up for me, because if you look closely, you'll see this is my statehood shirt. So you'll see the DC flag in different places. So I thought this would be the correct attire for today. Ms. Jenkins, the first question is for you. Is January 6th, or are the events of January 6th, the best argument that we've seen for a while for DC statehood? How can we capitalize on this opportunity?
I think it was a very good example to the nation that DC statehood is important. It impacts the nation because our mayor did not have the power to call out our National Guard. They couldn't protect the Capitol from invasion because our mayor did not have the ability to call out our National Guard. Our National Guard is controlled by the President of the United States, the Secretary of the Army. And our mayor at this point does not have the best relationship with the president. It was important that the nation see that DC statehood is very, very important.
Thank you for that. Mr. Jordan,
Yes.
Laura mentioned in her introduction the long and patient fight for DC statehood. You've been in this fight for some time. What lessons would you like the activists of today, and you are part of it, to take away from the success, considerable success that you and others had stopping the highway coming through our city, which I'm reminded of every time I come to the end of 395. I give you praise, brother. Every time I get to the end of 395 at New York Avenue, I'd say, thank goodness for ECTC.
Well, thank you.
So,
Well, thank you so much. But of course, I share that. I mean, I can't say that a great deal of the credit falls on any one person. There's a group, of course, who are genius leaders I want to speak about. But before we go, I'd like to just add one comment to the question you asked at first about the events of January 6th. I think that January 6th also, would add to Anise's comments, was an attempt to demonstrate that the foundation myth of this country was sufficient. That it was not only sufficient, but valid and in power. The polar alternative is full enfranchisement and full empowerment of the democratic institutions. Statehood is a fight for full empowerment of the democratic institutions of this nation that can be obliterated by the nation's racist foundation myth. So what we would say is that the polar alternative to that attempt, forceful attempt to disrupt the nation's processes, democratic processes, is full enfranchisement and full empowerment of the democratic institutions of the nation. With this question you've just asked about, I want to make sure I call it out because it should be, frankly, in the memory bank of everybody in DC. The ECTC, that's the Emergency Committee for the Transportation Crisis. It's the brainchild, frankly, of a group of activists. It was, frankly, DC's first and successful, most successful, cross-border, multi-ethnic, multi-racial coalition, activist coalition. And its objective was to halt the march of highways across cities in the United States in the wake of the Eisenhower Interstate Highway Bill that built highways, over 41,000 miles of highways in the nation. But the foundation myth folks, the insurrectionists, found a way to use those highways to do more than just expand the economy of the nation, but also to isolate Black communities, separate them from the communities in which they were a part, organic parts, and control them as well. ECTC, led by the inimitable Julius Hobson, a man after whom I've patterned actually most of my adult life, Sammy Abbott, in fact, the Sammy Abbott Center is the sort of town hall of Potomac. What is that nearby? Excuse me. Sammy Abbott, Angela Rooney, Reggie Booker. These are all heroes, frankly, in the history of this city and this colony soon to be a state. But the lessons are several. We prevailed, but it was a long fight and it was at times violent. In fact, there were bombings 2 days before a Senate hearing. There was police activity, police violence against the activists. But I think that demonstrated in several ways. One, that we have the power. The people have the power. We're always looking to influence those who are the power elite who holds the power. We hold the power. We are the power. It's also true that we made, in statehood, the fight for statehood, just like with the ECTC, we always have a lot more friends than we think we do. It's also important to understand that justice, the fight for justice, has long coattails. In fact, self-determination is a universal objective, and it has a long shelf life. It hasn't died out yet. I think that what I would mention also is the most important characteristic of the activists in the ECTC is that they were indomitable, resolute, nothing other than rejecting the highway funds that would divide Washington, D.C., make it unrecognizable today. They prevailed against that. And I think that's the ongoing lesson in the fight for statehood. In fact, the graduates of the fight ECTC became the core of the DC Statehood Party. So we owe this fight for self-determination and its multiple applications to what the people need.
Thank you for that. Mr. Hobson-Powell, could you give us an overview of the organizations and the efforts right now involved with statehood, including 51 for 51, but I'll let you take it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I know we have DC Vote, which is, you know, a citywide initiative. It's been placed out because we recognize it to be a local priority that as we look at these larger fights that we're having, whether it's the fight for political self-determination in a general sense or some of these smaller, more segmented social fights like women's reproductive justice or environmental justice, we understand that they all have through lines with DC statehood. So DC Vote is the official kind of effort on behalf of the city to get that off the ground. My advocacy has been done with the group 51 for 51. 51 for 51 is a coalition of young Native Washingtonians who have decided that we need to make DC the 51st state with 51 votes in the Senate. That if 51 votes is enough to nominate 2 Supreme Court justices, that 51 votes should be enough to enfranchise the over 700,000 mainly Black and brown residents here in Washington, D.C., who have all of the rights, all of the obligations, rather, of obligations, but not all of the rights. And so I know that we've been some of the leaders on the ground. We actually had Mitch McConnell directly remark on the work that we were doing with 51 for 51. He said that our attempts to make DC the 51st state with 51 votes was us trying to nuke the Senate, which I found to be hilarious, coming from Mitch McConnell, who self-declared himself the Grim Reaper, right? It's almost as if he was the only person nuking the Senate at the time that he made his comments. But all that aside, you know, just the fact that he commented on the work that we were doing lets us know that we're headed in the right direction. You know, we hit the ground running starting in 2019, hitting the early primaries, primary states really trying to get candidates to endorse. I actually had the privilege of securing personally the endorsements of Kamala Harris in Muscatine, Iowa, and President Joe Biden in South Carolina. And so I've really just been trying to get those endorsements. And now that they're in positions of power, following up, making sure that they stay the course and making sure that they continue to support DC statehood all the way through.
What's the argument that you feel is strongest for folks living outside of DC? I mean, what do you see as the argument that's winning folks over in Iowa or Nebraska or where have you?
I think really not even an argument as much as an education, right? I think that, you know, a lot of what has sustained DC's lack of statehood is a scourge of misinformation and ignorance around the issues. We find that Iowans, that South Carolinians, that, you know, New Hampshireans are not fully aware of the complexities that we face here in Washington, D.C. You know, there are a lot of people who only believe and truly have only believed that all we have here in Washington, D.C. is the White House, is the National Monument, is the Smithsonian they came to visit on their bus from millions of miles away that one time in the 5th grade or the 4th grade. They don't understand the robust culture that exists here. You know, whether it's activism with ECTC, whether it's music with EU and Sugar Bear, and, you know, go-go and just the culture that we have here generally, right? They don't appreciate all of that. So I would say it's not so much a winning argument as much as it is a winning approach of education, which is filling in the gaps and letting them know in real time. You know, America was founded on the idea that there would be no taxation without representation, right? And building it up from there and to say, hey, did you hear about DC? We're kind of the living, breathing example of that in real time. And just as we begin to share the realities of DC's lack of statehood, the fact that we were shorted hundreds of millions of dollars in the CARES Act because we're not a state, as though COVID was going to do some differentiation when it came to DC about if we were a state or not, right? And when we explain these things to people that are out of state, they're like, oh yeah, like it makes sense why you guys would want to sit at the table, why us paying the highest federal taxes in the nation, we would want to have a piece of that federal conversation around legislation, right? And so, like I said, I don't really think that it's argumentative as much as it is educational, but I think that once you start to give people these facts that they're oftentimes missing about DC statehood and about the fact that it's bigger than just political dialogue between the left and the right, but like there are real life implications to DC's lack of statehood. I think that people are on board and they see it not as a Democrat issue, not as a Republican issue, but as a human rights issue, but as a general American democratization issue. And that's how we've been able to grow our coalition and grow our table.
And I agree with him. I think DC statehood is very important for us to say it is a life or death issue. The fact that our needle exchange program was held up for years was by Congress was proof that it was life or death. That was when DC led the nation in HIV/AIDS. We needed clean needle exchange, and we didn't have the power to get it. We didn't have the authority to get it. We didn't have the right to overrule the Congress, which controls our budget, controls our laws, and controls everything in DC. That's in the Constitution. The Constitution, paragraph 117, section 8, says that the Congress should have complete control over DC. We say that is wrong. It's time for DC statehood. It's time for us to educate the country. It's time for DC statehood.
You know, I'd like to add to that the remarks of Ty and for Anise, just this observation. Senator Manchin of West Virginia lies knowingly whenever he says that DC, the District of Columbia, requires a constitutional amendment in order to gain statehood. I always ask people, well, you know, only at the risk of their own embarrassment, how many amendments are there to the United States Constitution? And sort of when they give up, I say, well, here's a clue. There used to be 26, but there are 27. And if DC required statehood, if that was a requirement, a constitutional requirement, that is a constitutional amendment, there were 13 original colonies, now there are 50 states. That means there should be at least 37 amendments to the US Constitution granting statehood. There are only 27. Why would he still say that, knowing that it's not true? It's because, and I want to add this to the discussion, some things have changed in the way people get their information and the way they support or act on their information. Joe Manchin is speaking to an audience that is not that concerned about truth. They'd rather have things they prefer as truth to be true. So if it isn't true now, it's what they would prefer DC to have to go through to become a state. So we have, in addition to, as Ty is putting, it's an educational issue, but it's also an aggressive educational question. And it also actually highlights the lack of civic education in this nation, because civic education, frankly, is one of the enemies of the foundation myth of this country.
just really quickly back on
Go
that,
ahead.
and then I'll leave it alone. But I mean, it's crazy when we see holdouts from people like Senator Manchin, right? Because Senator Manchin's state, West Virginia, actually wasn't made with the constitutional amendment. It was done with Congress, along with multiple other states. And so this myth that we have to do all of these different things, racism, straight up and straight down. We hear the dog whistling at these hearings, and they're saying that DC doesn't have real people. I look and I tug my skin and I say, I feel very real. And I know that there are over 700,000 Washingtonians who feel that same realness. And so, it's important, and I'm passing back to Cosby so I don't go on a tangent here, but it's just important to really hold them to account. No Democrat should be against DC statehood, especially if they are for the progressive values that they claim to espouse so much. Now is the time to stand with DC now that we have this majority. And it's my hope that we'll push DC statehood through and be the 51st state sooner than later.
And it's not a power grab, as they claim. They claim it's a power grab for the Democratic Party. It's not a power grab. It's a seeking for your citizenship rights. Every citizen should have representation in the House and the Senate. If you pay federal taxes, which we do, we would be considered a donor state. It's not a lack of rights. It's a lack of citizenship rights. They need to tell us why. What is the reason why they don't want DC to be a state? Is it race?
Well, let's stay on race for a minute. I mean, race is all over this. So it's not like we're going to be here for just a minute. But right now, the city formerly known as Chocolate City is 46% Black. And I have heard increasingly since the death of George Floyd that DC statehood is a racial justice issue. Okay. My worry is that as that percentage of Black Washingtonians goes down, that the argument that this is a racial justice issue loses some appeal. And I'm just going to throw that out and let folks deal with that.
Oh, really quickly, I think, let's kind of backtrack to the history, right? We now are at a point where the statehood conversation is the loudest that it's been in recent memory. The fact that it's at the point that it's been in recent memory is also coinciding with DC's population being the least Black that has been in recent memory, right? From historical highs around the 70s to the composition that it is now, like you said, of roughly 46%. So as we are looking at gentrification and the effects of that, and the idea that 46 potentially moves down throughout the years, I think that the conversation around it as a racial equity issue may lose some of its shine in some instances, but not in others. And so, for instance, I'll go back and I'll revisit all of these things that we kind of talk about as general social issues. The needle exchange program that Ms. Jenkins referred to earlier disproportionately affected Black and brown people. Gun violence. Washington, D.C. has some of the most progressive gun violence prevention laws on the books. But due to our lack of ability to have a seat at the table to speak on issues like red flag laws and background checks, guns from other states with lax regulations are coming in and wreaking havoc on our streets, killing our babies, our sons and our daughters. Again, disproportionately Black and brown sons of daughters of Washington, D.C. that are losing their lives. We talk about the disproportionate resource allocation that exists east of the river, right? I mean, all of these things are disproportionately affecting Black people. Down to 2014, right? We overwhelmingly as a locale decided that we wanted to legalize marijuana, only for a lawmaker that came from a state with no attachment to our issues, added a provision to that bill, making it impossible. Again, when you go and you look at the numbers post-2014, as far as enforcement of those arrests go, who is disproportionately represented in those numbers? Black people. And so the conversation around DC's lack of statehood as a racial equity issue is that I think that during this moment of racial reckoning that we are all experiencing as a nation, I think globally really, because it has invited international conversation as well, we would be remiss to not see, like I said, how past the political dialogue in real time, how DC's lack of statehood has been injurious to its Black community. And so that's what we mean when we say that it's a racial equity issue, is that the statistics bear out that Black people have received a significant harm from our lack of statehood, and that things would have went different had we had the autonomy to go a different direction. But I think to your point though, about how that might lose some appeal over the years as the population changes, while it is definitely relevant to bring up, I don't think that that's the strongest argument. I think my strongest argument is coming again from campaigning for DC statehood as a human rights issue, right? Before I even get to the idea of race, and like I said, there's so much of that embedded into this idea of DC statehood, right? But even before we get there, basic humanity says that we have bought in enough to this nation where we should be able to participate. It makes no sense. There is no other advanced nation in the world that would have their capital city literally not be a part of democracy. There's no other advanced nation in the world that does it. We are the only one that has the capital locale not actively being a part of the legislature nationally. And you know what I'm saying? I think that is something that requires revisiting.
I sort of contribute to that. I want to agree in the sense that if everybody were to take a deep breath, fine, take another one. I'd only tell you that every breath you've ever taken in the United States was governed by white supremacy. There is no exception. You haven't taken any other breaths. What it also means is that public policy everywhere has at its root a racial differential, even in Washington, DC. Think about housing in Washington, DC. Think about public transportation in Washington, DC. Think about taxes and what you get for your taxes in Washington, DC. There is a disproportionate distribution of the tax funds in Washington, DC to the wealthiest and whitest communities. So this question I'm raising here is that statehood should not be just based on our numbers, whether majority or not, but whether or not there's a racial differential in the policies of the state as well. So it's internal as well. Something else to keep in mind. Right now, in this Trump era, if we can call it that, those insurrectionists of January 6th, it suggests that about half of the electorate, a little less than half of the electorate, believe that Black people already have enough power. And we're 13, and they say we're 13%, which obviously is an undercount of the population. So it's not based on whether or not we have a majority that we can make the best claim for statehood. But it's the fact that race-based public policy, race-based approach to the franchise. These are the questions. In fact, what we end up doing is seeing, as Ty is suggesting, that we expand the basis for the argument for statehood. It's not just a question of majorityism and respect for the majority. Remember, South Africa was controlled by a minority. So what we're saying is, the question is, where does the power lie? Political, economic power. Where does it lie? Who holds it? That's
I think the interests of our last two states, Hawaii and Alaska, do prove that this is based on race. Trump called Puerto Rico a S-hole country. That was racist. This country is ruled by racism. Black Lives Matter was out to support statehood. I asked John Lewis, what's wrong with DC statehood? What's going on with DC statehood? He said, you are too quiet. You have to bring out race. You have to bring out race as an issue. You have to make it strong and bring it out as an issue that you don't have your rights, you don't have your citizenship, and you don't have DC statehood, which would bring citizenship to the Black people and the white people in the District of Columbia. It's an equalizer.
Speaking of bringing them out, I see one of my students in the audience. How you doing, Ramaya? Ramaya and I were out in front of Thurgood Marshall with our statehood signs, both homemade and manufactured, trying to get people to honk as they drove one way or the other down Martin Luther King Avenue. And I was surprised at how hard it was to get some folks, even folks with DC tags, to honk. So the name of this panel is Imagining Statehood. I'd like all of you to tell us, what is it going to look like when we're a state? What are the, what does the greener pasture look like? Because clearly not enough people can see that greener pasture. And we got to get even Washingtonians more fired up about this issue. Forget about folks in Iowa and elsewhere. Help us to see what is it going to look like. And I don't mean the highfalutin. I love words like self-determination, but I think that we need to help people see here is something that's going to happen on a day-to-day level, bread and butter, that you can see when we become a state.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a lot of what we've been doing at 51 though. It's like you said, beyond the highfalutin, right? Kind of meeting people where they're at. Like, hey, we're in a housing project and we're talking to these people about how housing police have been pestering them about marijuana and all these different things, right? It's like, well, DC was on the state. That this is not federal land anymore, right? This is now Commonwealth, which means that it's regulated by DC's laws, which makes this a $25 citation at the most, not you being evicted, not always, right? So you have to have relevant touch points, to your point, of telling people why they have skin in the game. I know that when we talk about DC statehood, just like I said, because there is a lack of information around the issue, there are a lot of people who feel like it's not their fight. And so you've seen this kind of apathy from even people who, like you said, would have these DC tags and would be the primary beneficiaries of DC being granted statehood, right? But it's because I think it's two things. One, like I said, is the ignorance. Two, is the other part of being so tied into your lived reality that you can't begin to imagine that some higher level political restructuring changes anything for who you are. If you're not making a livable wage, what does DC statehood do for that, right? If you are housing insecure, right, what did DC statehood do for that, right? And so I think that there are a lot of questions to be begged by some of these disinterested populations because, we from our positions of privilege and having the appreciation of history and having the theory can have, the happiness for statehood. I think there are a lot of people that are struggling to survive. They don't necessarily see the touch points. And so it's for us to stand in the gap and say, hey, look, this is how statehood would benefit you. Like with us being able to control our local politics, we can make a firmer commitment to wrap around social services so that we can make sure we're feeding our city, so that we can make sure we're housing our city, right? You start reaching them and approaching them with the things that are relevant to them, because just as a high political ideal, just DC statehood because it's right. Okay, cool. But that doesn't change people's lives in real time. I think, like you said, you got to just start playing around with it, beginning to imagine what it would look like to send young men and women from Washington, DC off to Congress. I had the privilege of graduating high school at the age of 13. I got my bachelor's degree when I was 15. I got my master's degree when I was 17 years old. I'm one of many brilliant young people in Washington, DC who would be ready to emerge onto a political scene and be a part of that process, right? So it is, I think, just kind of just painting the picture for people, meeting them where they're at and talking to them about the issues that they care about. As you could hear from just how we kind of walk down the list of social issues, whether it's environmental justice or women's reproductive justice, there are touch points with statehood and a lot of these other issues that people care about. It's just about taking that time, like I said, to individually meet these people to see what it is that you're caring about and how it is that DC statehood would enhance your ability to address that issue. I think driving past, it doesn't really lend itself to that kind of robust discussion that you would need to have around the big issues, but I'll just say one big issue that I've heard a lot of Washingtonians all across the 8 wards refer to commonly about DC statehood is what happens to DC TAG, DC Tuition Assistance Grant, right? Which
you're talking to a man with a middle schooler and a high schooler. Talk to me.
What happens to TAG, right? And this tuition assistance grant, for those who aren't familiar, it's about a $400 million congressional allocation that is made annually to act as financial college support for tuition for Washingtonians who go to school out of state. To answer that question, I want to pose another question and then kind of just move from there, right? How much money does DC leave on the table by not being able to tax the millions of people that come in and out of its borders every single day for work and leisure? Leave that question there for a moment. Washington, DC, like I said, in a World War state, we will have more of a pool of money to deal with, in the sense that we are now able to tax this traffic in the same way you see these tolls in Virginia and Maryland and these other states. We're able to tax this incoming and outgoing traffic on a regular basis, so much so that that allocation would almost surely number more than $400 million in 365 days, right? So we now have a deeper pool of money to pull from, and we're not at the beck and call of Congress to approve it, because again, understand, DC TAG, while it has been something of relative normalcy as a programming here in DC, is not something that is set in stone. It is a congressional allowance. And so when you look at the context of the Trump era, right, which we've opened up for this discussion, right? Why are we leaving the idea of supporting our babies and providing for their future to a larger Congress that can't seem to agree on anything often at times, when we know for a fact that here, that is something that we care about? DC Statehood put that power in our hands by giving us the deeper purse and by giving us the power to say, you know what, DC TAG is a priority here. We're going to fund that fully. And that is where our tax money will go to. And, so I think that is kind of how we loop folks in. It's just by really just reaching out to them and doing the research about the specific issues that they care about, and then filling that information in with how DC Statehood will provide opportunities for them to lead in those realms.
And it's actually TAG that would have $2.6 billion. We leave billions of dollars on the table. So we would have a senator to argue that point. We would have representation to argue that point, to give us an argument for DC statehood, for TAG, for the things that we need to survive, because we need someone to speak for us. We need the rights to speak for us. We need TAG. We need to control our prison system. We don't have any, we don't have a prison that people can visit their relatives in prison.
I just want to
don't have it.
Really quickly, because Anise hits on this powerful point about how we don't have criminal justice in our hands. The fact that people who make an infraction here go and serve time in Colorado, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, right? And so when we talk about the idea of revisiting criminal justice and making it something that is more rehabilitative than punitive, the way that it's supposed to be, we can't help but to think to ourselves of the positive outcomes that could come about if we would have control over things like Ms. Jenkins just said, a prison system, right? The ability to have closeness of families so they can come visit, give them light at the end of the tunnel, a reason to want to get out of jail. I mean, it's already been proven through numerous studies how an ability to be connected to what you left in the outside world oftentimes reduces recidivism. So us throwing, like I said, our native sons and daughters off to states that don't know them and they don't know, places that make it hard for their family to get to and hard for that connection to be maintained. You know what I'm saying? We're only inviting some of the chaos that probably led them to being there in the first place. And so, to Ms. Jenkins' point, it is important that we have control over all facets of what Washington, D.C. is. I think that we'd be a better place for it.
Mm-hmm.
Mr.
I would
Jordan,
add to
how,
this, Cosby.
how do you pitch this idea to Washingtonians? What does the greener pasture look like when we become a state, Mr. Jordan?
Yeah, I want to add to this. First, the loss of the prison, the return of Lorton to Virginia developers is a Clinton legacy. The same Clintons that called young black men super predators, the same Bill and Hillary. But when you ask what will Washington, D.C. look like when it's a state, let's go to the People's Constitution. That's what it was for. That constitutional convention that was, and the Constitution that was produced was supported and endorsed, ratified by the people of the District of Columbia. It included, for example, a state bank, how to make loans and how to be prosperous, like the only state in the country, North Dakota, has done with its public bank. We can set the minimum wage. You know, we don't have to have that many people traveling 2 hours by transit for a $9 an hour job. Full health care. We can modify the Affordable Care Act under the terms of the People's Constitution. More cooperatives. We can have the kind of authority over what we say we need. That's what Washington, D.C. will look like when a state. It will look like what the people have already decided, ratified, and said, it's about time someone, in addition to us, and we're going to fight to make it clear, does what we say we want. There's no one else who can make that choice.
I'm looking at Kathy's question in the chat, or her comment about the collection of signatures from 30 different states for statehood. But the part of her comment that's captured my attention is the reminder that there's a hearing coming up on June 22nd. Somebody talk about that hearing. What should we be paying attention to? What should we be doing before that hearing? To whom should we be reaching out, etc.?
Hearing 22nd. So we already had HR 51 make its advancement through the House. You know, huge shout out to Eleanor Norton for championing that. But now we're in the Senate, place where things oftentimes get lost, where American progress is oftentimes stalled for no reason at all. And so we again find ourselves on the doorsteps of that same kind of stalling as it relates to statehood. Like, although we're getting a hearing we're getting a hearing June 22nd. That's cute. We're being heard. But what's better is being felt. What's better than being felt is being accommodated properly, being granted statehood. And so it's cool to have a hearing. But when you understand the political realities, you understand holdouts like Joe Manchin, you know, people on the edge like Kirsten Sinema that make the hearing just kind of a sexy show of American democracy. Hey, we can go through the motions of giving you guys the hearing, but what will come of it? And so I think right now, to your point of like who to pester, who to bother, Joe Manchin has stated right now that he doesn't support DC statehood advancing through the bill as it's been. He wants a constitutional amendment, so it's putting pressure on him because having the majority in the Senate means nothing if we can't have all of our troops in rank. And so, like I said, right now, there is disunity amongst the ranks of Democrats right now around the issue of DC statehood, around the issue of eliminating the filibuster, reforming the filibuster, however you approach it. And so, like I said, you know, the hearing, I mean, is cool. We'll have some commentary from the mayor. We'll have some commentary from Mark Morial, from a representative from the Cato Institute, and then another research-based witness, I believe. And that's the 4 witnesses that I saw listed out. And so that's who our kind of big players will be, you know, stakeholders on either side of the argument who will argue for or against. But I would just say, just leading up to it, I mean, putting the pressure on Democrats to deliver us the kind of change that we deserve. Because, you know, bigger than just this hearing on the 22nd for DC statehood, if we have elements in the Democratic Party like Joe Manchin, like Kirsten Sinema, who are willing to break ranks during the times where it's time to fight crucial fights around the values that the party claims to uplift, then there is a serious internal conflict that will almost eat away at the Democratic Party and at its base, because there are so many needs that are being underserved. I mean, just looking at the fact that they cannot even coalesce around filibuster reform or eliminating the filibuster, despite the fact that that has been used to stall. I mean, anti-lynching laws historically have been stalled by filibusters. It's been the reason why they haven't been passed, hundreds of them. So like, if we can't stick to our guns and really choose to have some grit and some determination around the issues we claim to care about, this hearing is literally just that, a hearing. Things will be heard, but nothing will be done. And so I just want us to go into this hearing understanding who the holdouts are and continuing to put pressure on them, because it's not enough to have a majority in the Senate. I
want to add two perspectives to that comment. One is we can't, in the discussion, we can't go far from the fact that the most support we'll ever get for DC statehood is based on the demand made by the greatest number of DC residents and our allies. That's, I think, incontrovertible. The other is we have to internationalize the fight for DC statehood a lot better than we do now. For example, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights should be owned by DC as part of a lesson to the entire nation. We can't depend upon the Democrats or the Republicans or any political party. They all count noses before they make decisions. If they don't see the kind of robust, active, demanding, and like ECTC, sometimes rowdy demand for our rights for DC statehood, we won't get it. So it's not like party politics. It's who demands, and that demand states which way the power should change. But with respect to the internationalization, the international community doesn't hear enough about it. Remember, the United States is the only country now certified to the United Nations that does not permit its citizens of its capital area to be represented in its National Assembly. We just had company with Australia and South Africa. In fact, just in '95, we were left keeping company only with South Africa. We now are alone in this feature of this nation. So we have to internalize it, internationalize it, and our strength will grow because the fight for justice and self-determination has extremely long, powerful coattails.
I must say that Stand Up for Democracy, our organization, originated with Tim Cooper, who went around the world, who went to OAS, who OSCE, who got resolutions, international resolutions against the treatment of DC residents. We need to speak louder as get the citizens who Joe Manchin represented to speak out against him. They're the poorest people in their area, in this country. They need to tell him they want more progress in West Virginia. We need to get outreach to these people, and there's going to be a protest on that day, on the 22nd, and we want a large turnout.
Where will it be on the steps of the Capitol? Where will it be?
Well, we can't. It's going to be at the Senate. It's going to be at the Senate. I think it's the building that Joe Manchin is in, the Hart building. Okay. It's going to be in the building, not in the building, but because of COVID, we can't go in the building. But it's going to be visible and it's going to be very well intended.
I see a couple of questions here about community level governance, and I'm going to read one of them. Let's imagine DC becomes a state. Does the ANC system, which can be traced to the Home Rule Act, go away? does hyperlocal representation still have a place in the state of DC?
Well, we reached out to the ANC community, and we didn't get a large response. I don't think they know their history. They were created to represent the people of DC on the level of statehood. And as was the school board, I don't think they know their history. And we reached out to the ANCs purposely, but we didn't get a large response from them.
And then also just to kind of touch in on, I guess, the representation question, you know, there is, I mean, obviously constitutional proposals out there floating around for a state of Douglas Commonwealth, right, that propose how they would vest power in locally elected officials. But that's suggestive. And again, that's all just kind of to the point of this conversation, imagining statehood. It's not here yet. And so all of these different things that we're having questions about, how leadership will be meted out, how we would divide the wards, right? Governor, right? What happens with like all of these different moving pieces, that is for us to decide as a locale, and we can together, but we need to have the power first. We have to be vested with the power to have, like I said, our own affairs in our hands before we can start getting to some of the more granular issues like, okay, now do these council members roll over and become members of Congress, or what, right? Like how are we gonna do this? And so, like I said, we have proposals that are out there, but I think the most exciting part about DC statehood is that while there's a lot of ideation that has been done around DC statehood, because it has yet to be actualized, there is still room for active community input to determine where we go with it, to determine what we build out. And, you know, it's to Brother Jordan's point earlier, the emerging DC will look like what DC wants it to look like.
This question is from an anonymous. I'm so grateful for the activists who are here speaking, both the veterans and the next generation. Could you talk a bit about the efforts of some of the other fighters out there, like Arturo Griffiths? I see Mr. Jordan smiling.
Arturo and I have been comrades, colleagues, in the foxholes together. Arturo, can we go back far enough? Let's say 70s, early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. No, but he has been a fantastic advocate for rights in DC, but also Arturo has focused on the rights of working people. The working class, as a matter of fact. Arturo has been a genuine class fighter. And that's exactly what we're looking at in this season. I mean, think of the $300 unemployment check. And only wealthy people thought that it was simply too much for people to get because it wouldn't make low wages attractive. You can hear Arturo on his horn now about that's proof about the class organization of this society that must also be defeated.
There's an organization headed by Hector Rodriguez called DC Veterans for Statehood. They are well organized. They are representing DC Veterans for Statehood very well. They are out there fighting for statehood, and there's over 30,000 veterans in DC for DC statehood. I'm really very proud of him. I'm proud of being a member of the organization. They call me a veteran. I wasn't in the military because of my consistency, because of the fight for statehood, but they have nominated me as a veteran, and I accept the nomination.
Got a question from Ramaya here. how can youth help their peers understand DC statehood? Somebody take that on. How can we get young people to better understand this issue? Again, to me, that gets back to the bread and butter.
Mm-hmm. Sprinkle it in there every chance you get. You know, like I said, for me, I think I can still call myself a young activist. You know, I feel pretty young. Like I said, I'm turning 26 tomorrow, but it's young, youthful. And so, like I said, just as a younger person, I would say, when I'm talking to, I guess, middle-aged elementary school kids, because they don't necessarily have a deep attachment to the higher level issues, I just kind of talk to them about transformative urban leadership. The idea that, you know, they are brilliant and that they deserve to share that brilliance with this nation and hope that it makes us a better one, and that they should be in a position where they can do that. You know, I say to them that they should be able to care about certain things and have that care reflected by their governance. And you know, I kind of try to find easy ways to talk to them. So like I talked to an elementary school, and I was just like, you know, how would it feel if I asked you guys every day as you came into school to give me $1, but you gave me $1 for no reason? I never gave you anything. And all the third graders are like, what? Why am I giving you $1? And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of like DC's tax system, right? So like, you gotta find these different touch points to kind of humanize the issue. But like I said, I really think that like once you take it through the process of the fact that we give a thing, which is our talent, which is our obligations. We have men and women that serve our juries and the military, all these different things, right? When we give the best of ourselves, we don't get that in return. That's something that can be appreciated from the youngest person to the oldest person. And so, like I said, for young people, just really trying to find creative little storytelling and interactive sort of things to bring them in. For my older high school, college crowd, it's just like, you guys are opinionated and you guys now have thoughts about what the world should look like. Your best shot at being able to make this Washington, D.C. look like your ideal Washington, D.C. is if we're a state and we can empower people like you to make bold decisions, right? So just finding different ways to put young people in the driver's seat to let them know that in real time, it'll be a benefit for them.
One quick note, this past couple of years with Black Lives Matter, George Floyd world, youth have been emboldened. The role has been clear, and youth justifiably have been emboldened. I just want to give one example of by what I mean. We always talk about Rosa Parks when we speak about the Montgomery bus boycott. She was not the first person arrested for refusing to give up her seat. It was Miss Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old young woman of rare courage. She was ostracized by the Montgomery community as not being the best face for the movement. She wasn't light-skinned and she didn't have, quote, good hair. And she was pregnant soon as a youth, okay? Well, what else does it suggest? It suggests that here we have a young woman who's fearless, who's absolutely resolute, who knows her rights. She was dragged off the bus by police officers shouting, "You are violating my constitutional rights." Not like Rosa Parks saying, "Why do they hate us?" But you are violating my constitutional rights. And what we did, the community, Black community particularly, we did not address her development as a leader. Those are the characteristics we want from a leader: resolute, fearless, indomitable, right, and having this courage. We have to make sure that we are no longer a nation that does not develop its youth. And that's what Claudette Colvin represents. In Baltimore, December 21st, we celebrate and commemorate the Montgomery bus boycott as proof of a Black working class slam dunk against race-based transit policy. but we also commemorate the role played by Ms. Claudette Colvin.
And I must say that our group has junior ambassadors for DC Statehood. They're at the most 8 years old, and we are supporting them by teaching them what their parents are missing. They care about their parents. They don't want to inherit this fight. They shouldn't inherit this fight. We are educating them on the basis of they will not inherit this fight.
I've got another question here about statehood exacerbating or speeding up gentrification. Do you all see that happening? Do you see DC statehood as potentially exacerbating or speeding up gentrification? Especially if folks see DC as a place to move specifically because it becomes a state.
I mean, there's already an influx of people moving here to DC just because of the appeal that it has when we talk about earnings ability and the range of jobs that are here, the number of fields that are represented here, whether it's governance, whether it's IT. I mean, so there's any number of reasons why DC is already an attractive space for many transplants. And we've seen an influx of people from other states to DC for years as we've been modernizing. And I think that that's something that is a trend mirrored by many developing locales. I would say that I don't, at face value, see any direct causal links between DC statehood and gentrification, right? If anything, like I said, because affordable housing is something that we value so much as local Washingtonians, DC statehood actually gives us kind of like a legitimate chance to put a dent in what gentrification is, to have that codified on our books, to make a significant contribution and commitment to affordable housing, to allowing Native Washingtonians, to allowing aging Washingtonians to age in their communities with dignity, to live in their communities with dignity. And so I think, just to answer the question in short, I don't think there's any direct causal links that have been suggested by any of the studies that I've seen between gentrification and upcoming DC statehood.
Mr. Jordan, one of our friends wants to know if the DC Statehood Green Party is still a viable political force. How do you see local political development happening?
Two quick answers. First of all, the question being asked, I'm sure, by someone who knows that they don't think the role being played by the DC Statehood Green Party is strong enough. I think that answers the question. It isn't important that the DC Statehood Green Party be the leader of the statehood fight. It's important that people who organize to do so do just that. Don't revive the DC Statehood Green Party if it isn't functioning in our behalf in the fight for statehood. So if it's weak, strengthen it. If it's beyond reviving, let it go. You know, it's not important in itself. The DC Statehood Party is a direct result of the fight for DC statehood as recognized by the activists who led it at that time. It perhaps has seen its time pass. Don't worry about it. Organize, build the organizations that work for us, not those that we would like to keep working for us if they're not doing the job. On this question about gentrification. Gentrification and displacement is a function of the class distribution of economic and political power in the District of Columbia and anywhere else it occurs. Who else writes the zoning laws? Who else decides what sort of taxes you pay for homes, for exchange of property? Who decides these matters? That's a class issue. There's no law against affordable housing being close to a fixed guideway metro station. Do you find affordable housing at Gallery Place? There's no law against that. You got to fight for what we want. There's no gift from anyone, and we've never gotten one. Everything we've gotten, we've fought for. It is not a product of the political party system that supports zoning laws of the type that we have. And it's not a function of somebody just liking the folks who live in DC. It's all the result of a fight for democracy, a fight for representation and enfranchisement. So if the DC Statehood Green Party, and I say this because I'm the last president or last chair of the DC Statehood Party, and was chair when we merged with the DC Greens Party. We had hopes, but if they don't materialize, don't hang on to it, discard it, move with something that works.
Another question from Anonymous. What kind of precedent would DC statehood make? Would it open the door for territories like Puerto Rico to be able to become a state as well?
I think there's a conversation to be had around all of those territories. I don't necessarily think that it's the same kind of conversation in the sense that, Puerto Rico, Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands are more relics of U.S. colonialism and imperialism than I think that DC is. Like, DC is just lack of full inclusion into the democracy. For them, there are kind of larger questions to be begged, right? Especially when you look at Puerto Rico, for instance, right? You got about a third of the population that is for statehood, about a third of the population that is for liberation, and about a third of the population that is for continuing to operate in their designation right now. They get the benefits of being American for all intents and purposes without the actual technical incorporation into being for citizens in the ways that all Americans appreciate. And so I think that just as we begin to explore the idea of DC statehood, I do think that it begins to allow our minds to imagine, well, hey, what about that place? Or hey, what about those folks over there? Of course, it's up to the specific locales to determine exactly what it is they want to do with their future. Here in DC, we decided that we wanted statehood for our future, and overwhelmingly so. The residents decided that we want statehood. And so, if that is something that is shared by the citizens of Guam, the citizens of Puerto Rico, then they can go that way. But it's just, I think that what we understand right now is that we are being governed right now by a social contract that was written during a time where a lot of the things that we acknowledge as wrong right now weren't considered wrong, right? That a lot of these institutions that we're holding up, a lot of these principles that are foundational were established during the time where people that look like me and you were property, where women were relegated to second-class citizenship. And so we understand that in 2021, it's really time for us to kind of kick up some of the dust on the foundations of America, and really beyond imagining statehood, really reimagining America. And that looks like a lot of different things, reimagining criminal justice, right? And all of these different things. But I don't know, it's my hope that if the people of Puerto Rico and Guam and U.S. Virgin Islands, et cetera, want liberation, that they get it because they deserve it. But just to let the will of the people lead.
I want to get back into the weeds of making statehood happen a little bit and return to a conversation that the panelists and I had in a meeting earlier this week. Mr. Trump had offered to buy Greenland at one point. And I'm reminded of the admission of Hawaii and Alaska to the Union on the same day. And I'm also thinking about Delegate Norton's efforts to get our voting rights in Congress via a deal with Utah. So, Mr. Jordan, I'm going to give you first crack at this. Some people are wondering, do we need a bargaining chip? Do we need if DC is going to get statehood, then somebody else is going to get what? And you addressed this very well when we talked earlier in the week, this idea of what Alaska and Hawaii were supposed to be together. Go ahead.
Well, yes, I remarked in our earlier conversation about the slave era, enslavement era legacy that represents. Slave state or free state. Hawaii and Alaska. They can come in together. They keep something, it maintains some sort of status quo. Now that they've switched and Alaska is like Republican and Hawaii might be from time to time Democratic, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is we were still thinking in terms of the era before the Civil War, when Delegate Norton was suggesting that we should accept one vote in Congress and Utah get an additional vote in Congress. She wasn't really looking at what imbalance that did produce. Washington, D.C. would not get an additional electoral vote. We already had, we have 3. Utah would get an additional electoral vote. So where was the deal? There was no deal. That idea of we can trade, we can horse trade and maintain some sort of tit for tat, Greenland for statehood for Washington, D.C. Is not going to work. The principle instead is, again, the founding myth of this nation really was the background, was the context for that slave state, free state trade idea. The foundation myth is that white supremacy is the best context for governance of this nation. Well, the nation has not only outgrown it, it was never suitable for us in the first place. So this notion of dealing to get statehood is actually antiquated. And what can we offer besides being a stronger nation in which those who are qualified to vote according to the laws of the nation and the Constitution are enfranchised and can do so?
I'm going to start with Ms. Jenkins on this one. What is the question that we should have but have not yet answered? Or what is it that you want to make sure that people hear before we leave that we haven't gotten to yet? And that's going to be for everybody, starting with Ms. Jenkins.
I want to make sure that people know that we are for statehood, that we voted for statehood, that we had a constitutional convention in 2020 and 2016. We voted for statehood. We deserve equality with statehood. And that's the most I can say. We should have our rights for statehood, our rights with statehood, and that's the best I can say. We don't need an argument. We don't need a Tesla. We don't need as the Republicans say, we don't need a car dealership. We don't need mines, bowling alleys. We don't need that to be a state. The Constitution does not require that. It requires that you vote for statehood, that you have a Republican form of government, and we have that, and we're striving for that, and we need your help.
I would think that my basis, obviously, is we have to keep fighting, be resolute and indomitable. There's no question. If anything I learned from Julius Hobson and Sammy Abbott was you can win only if you keep fighting. But we also need to make certain that we demand respect for the people's Constitution. We didn't speak enough about the Constitution, but it is a document developed by our own representatives, chosen in fair elections. There was no dispute about whether or not the elections were fraudulent, and they spoke to our needs. We need to take a look at that, reopen it, and get that Constitution, not something that the mayor has said is our Constitution, but what the people have said is our Constitution. Now, and Mr. that last Jordan, point that I mentioned, the internationalization of the fight for.
When you say the people's Constitution, are you talking about the U.S. Constitution?
Is that the people's Constitution?
So talk to us about what you mean.
It says we the people in its preamble, but it never meant we the people. That Constitution, of course, is, in fact, that Constitution and the so-called fight for liberty that preceded it was a fight to make sure that if England abolished slavery, the colonies wouldn't have to. So that whole fight was a fight to make certain that slavery was maintained in the colonies that became the United States. Is that a people's constitution? Of course not. And in fact, slavery remained legal in the Constitution for another 20 years. What we're speaking of when I say the People's Constitution, 1980, 1982, we had a convention and then we had a vote that ratified that Constitution. And until that Constitution is ratified or modified, amended in the laws adopted by the Constitution itself, the People's Constitution, that's who we are and should be. And that's what the future of statehood looks like when we apply the provisions of that Constitution to the District of Columbia.
Mr. Hobson-Powell, what do you want to leave people with?
I think, you know, we've explored statehood, kind of asked some interesting questions about it, kind of poked some holes at it. DC statehood is a start, not a finish. It doesn't deliver us all the change that we want. It does not conclude these longer standing fights for liberation that exists within these communities. It does not end the fight for power in a lot of different facets. In fact, it just begins a new journey where we have a little bit more power. We're now fighting through some of the issues, right? Like I said, DC statehood, not a be all end all, not gonna end gun violence, not gonna, you know, raise children, but it'll be a start. It'll be a start towards us building the infrastructure of governance and infrastructure of community here that places power within the people and that allows us to make decisions that reflect our values. And so I saw that there was a question that was asked by Carmen that I wanted to just really tap in on and leave with, because it said, how have convos around DC statehood incorporated the perspectives of local Piscataway peoples and just like the indigenous folks that occupied what was Washington, DC before it was here. And I think that, you know, there is, we believe that none of us are free until all of us are free. And so I think that as we are having conversations about correcting historic wrongs, right, we begin to also have points of intersection where we talk about what we want our new DC to be, right? So for instance, we saw Washington football team change their name from the Washington Redskins. Now, Washingtonians were decidedly against the name because it was seen as something that was disrespectful to the Native American community, namely Piscataway and Nakastini peoples that were here prior to the development urban sprawl of DC. And so I think that it just looks like us continuing to stand in solidarity, continuing to make the space at our table for indigenous leadership to come and also make their voices heard, bearing in mind that this was their historical land. But that's just that. I would say all in all though, to anybody out there, if you want to stay abreast of the issues, you could check out 51for51.org. We have a very, 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 very easy to follow kind of issues tab that kind of outlines some of those talking points you might want to use at your local middle school, high school conversation with your homies. Stay tuned for this June 22nd hearing. Like I said, I'm sure we'll get some interesting commentary. We know the House hearing, we found out that we weren't real people because we didn't have a car dealership and, you know, all these different things. So I'm sure we'll hear some spicy commentary all the same in the Senate, but just beyond, you know, the hearing, like I said, it's one thing to be heard, it's another thing to be felt, and then beyond being felt, it's another thing to be accommodated on the basis of those feelings. And so it's my hope that in my lifetime, Washingtonians will be accommodated. You know, I'm actually, my fiance is 37 weeks pregnant, so I'm on standby any moment now, right, to make this hospital run. But we're having a baby girl, and I think about the world that I want for her, and I don't want her to inherit this fight. I don't want her to have to be my age and be 20 something, still arguing about how Washingtonians deserve self-determination. That should be something that we can deliver in her lifetime. And so it's my hope that together we will. And it's been an honor to be a part of this panel. Huge shout out to Samuel Jordan. Huge shout out to Anise Jenkins. Love the hat. Huge shout out to our man Cosby. Great moderator. It was an honor to just be here in community with you guys.
Happy birthday, Ty. You might become a father and turn 26 on the same day. Watch out.
Indeed, man.
Same birthday.
Well, I can't imagine
Thank
a
you.
better way of closing out this program. I thank each of you so very much from the bottom of my heart for this wonderful dialogue among each of you, but also just the absolutely amazing, tremendous work that you're doing on behalf of all of us Washingtonians. And thank you for the reminder that we all need to put our weight behind this fight. We all have our own ways, our own tools, our own communities. By working together, we can achieve a world where Ty's daughter is fully represented and has full political rights. There's this program will be on YouTube along with closed captioning in just a few days. And if you found this program to be interesting and provocative and has inspired you, I really do want to encourage you to share this link with your friends, family, and colleagues. Let's spread the word, especially with the hearing and the demonstrations on June 22nd. So we have just a week or so to do that. If this is an issue you do want to learn more about, we have a lot of great resources for you at the DC History Center, in particular around kind of the long history of this issue, which has really been with us since the very beginnings of the city. We have additional reading recommendations, resources at dchistory.org, particularly under the Context for Today section. And then there's a page that's called The Case for Statehood. You might also want to take a look at our LibGuide as well, if you're familiar with that format. We also collaborated recently with the mayor's administration on the documentary, Becoming Douglas Commonwealth from DC Disenfranchisement to Full Democracy, which was produced and directed by Nolan Williams Jr. And presented by Mayor Muriel Bowser. So that's another great way to learn more about this. For more programs like this one, search for our DC History Center YouTube channel. You'll find past presentations with closed captionings on a range of different topics that I mentioned at the beginning of this program. And then also another housekeeping note, we will soon be sending you a survey, and we're really eager to hear your thoughts on this program, what you learned, and we also want to hear from you what are some other topics you'd like to see in a future Context for Today program. I want to add, as the executive director of the DC History Center, that I'm really grateful to all of you who donated to the DC History Center when you registered for tonight's program. Revenue from Zoom programs like this remains a key source of support for us as a small nonprofit organization in the pandemic era. It's not over yet, and we still have months ahead and kind of returning to normal operations. And so I just want to ask you, if you found this program important, please consider making a contribution at dchistory.org. And I should also acknowledge the members who are joining us today. Your support as a member is also truly crucial to the work that we do. While I'm on the subject of thanks, I want to recognize again the Office of the Secretary of Washington, D.C. for supporting this educational program, as well as Events DC and the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. Thanks again to our wonderful speakers, Anise Jenkins, Samuel Jordan, Ty Hobson-Powell, and Cosby Hunt. And also behind the scenes here at the DC History Center, I am daily grateful for the extraordinary work of my team, Program Manager Marin Orchard, Katrina Ingraham, Tamora Wright, Maggie Downing, and really the full team here at the Carnegie Library who make these programs possible. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and we hope to see you again soon.